the blackest hour in history since the last 24 hours of the life of Christ we are living in today. Living on the very brink of hell itself. Living on the brink of annihilation. And we're not praying.
In the middle of the 20th century, the threat of nuclear war fueled a revival of Christian fundamentalism. Emerging from the greatest conflict in human history, and with the atomic age directly ahead, humanity was entering a strange and unpredictable new era. Amidst this turmoil came the foundation of Israel in 1948, which to evangelicals seemed to be a fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
We have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we in agreement. These were the words of Isaiah, who said that Israel will sign a pact with the Antichrist, and this will be the beginning of the end.
In I'd give it 1982, but date setting is dangerous. I'd say within the next couple of years we're going to see a war there. The next major war to be fought in the world is going to be right here. This is the place where God and Satan are going to square off.
Mr. President, I'd like to pick up this Armageddon theme. You've been quoted as saying that you do believe deep down that we are heading for some kind of biblical Armageddon.
A number of theologians for the last decade or more have believed that this was true, that the prophecies are coming together that portend that. But no one knows whether Armageddon is 1,000 years away or day after tomorrow.
As the Cold War escalated and conflict spread and civil disorder intensified, the more it seemed like the world was spinning out of control. The growth of new technologies, from the electric guitar to the television, acted as accelerants of cultural change, leading to new types of music, subcultures, and religious movements.
Bhagwan is my master, and I love him.
I'm in love with him. That's the only thing I can say.
Disoriented and bewildered by these rapid shifts in values, they saw in the kaleidoscopic fever of the mass media the outlines of something immense, ancient, and menacing. The existence of a global network of satanic agents who were secretly brainwashing, torturing, and sexually abusing their children to pave the way for the coming of the Antichrist.
He-Man is being lifted up as a god, and many children are receiving him as such.
Some Halloween costumes can be linked to devil worship and satanic cults.
It is war.
Surrounded by signs of the end times, they looked to an age beyond the coming catastrophe, when Christ would return to rule the earth for a 1,000-year theocracy.
The future ruler of the world is not capitalism or communism, it's Christ.
But before this could happen, the unbelievers would have to endure the 7-year tyranny of the Antichrist, who would rule the earth as a high-tech totalitarian empire from his throne in the Third Temple in Jerusalem.
Today's temple is defiled by the worst sacrilege that could possibly befall Israel. The computer has been the most innovative and time-saving device known to man.
The computer is just like talking to somebody. The computer asks you a question and you give it an answer.
It's the new golden calf. A computer that speaks and convinces people that it thinks. Hundreds of millions of people will worship that inanimate object. And it's in the temple.
My friends and loyal subjects, for the last 4 years, we have worked together to overcome the greatest physical hardships the world has ever known. World war, drought, famine, pestilence, fire, earthquakes, and volcanoes of unprecedented violence. But we have prevailed, thanks to our fantastic computer technology and the intervention of His Satanic Majesty. Where, dear friend, was the loving God of creation during our recent perils? Was he helping mankind, the children of his creation? No. On the contrary, it is he who has visited these disasters upon us. And to you, God, God of wrath and destruction to mankind, I say...
To make sense of the 20th century, they journeyed to the darkest parts of the human imagination.
Living by the automobile, the first young adults in the age of the push button.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, the world underwent a period of unprecedented technological change. The automobile had created a new all-American way of life that revolved around new types of homes, the suburb, structures based on military construction techniques mastered during the war, filled with new waves of home appliances and labour-saving devices. Machines that alleviated the drudgery of homemaking, which had encumbered women for generations.
Why do your dishes the old-fashioned way when you do your other household work the modern way?
But despite these technological marvels, society still clung to its traditional models of social organisation, sexual distribution of labour, the nuclear family, and fear of God.
This whole kitchen was designed for efficiency and convenience. Freedom from unnecessary drudgery.
Day after day, she had passed by that little book. But now it suddenly held the key to a wonderful future. Even the physics class was what a girl would like. It was about physics in the home. The technical comparisons which she is making now will enable her to give first-hand advice on the selection of home appliances. Well, you can see that cooking is practically applied chemistry.
This new model of living was encouraged by government and industry, and was seen as a new form of material culture that could be exported abroad as part of the escalating ideological conflict with the Soviet Union. The atheist empire stood as a new mysterious nemesis, fear of which fueled a pervasive and growing paranoia that American society was being secretly subverted and infiltrated. That beneath this serene illusion of everyday life lay plots and secret conspiracies orchestrated by the godless Soviets to disrupt society and establish a global world order.
Frankly, I have better things to do with my time.
I don't think you have any conception of the danger of the Communist Party.
Nevertheless, their objective remains the total conquest of all the earth.
Rallying a nation of television viewers into hysteria to sweep us up into the White House with powers that will make martial law seem like anarchy.
And society was being disrupted, not by the Soviets, but by technology itself.
One day through television, the entire world will stream into our living rooms with the velocity of light.
Through the communications satellite, we saw the first stirrings of a new global culture, and at the forefront of this were the Beatles. At first, just another pop band. By the mid-60s, their popularity soon approached an unnerving form of mass hysteria, pioneering the stadium rock concert as a way of handling their vast number of fans. But by 1966, they had to stop touring, because every time they played a concert, their songs were being drowned out by the ecstatic worship of their followers. Confined to the studio, they invented the music video as a way of reaching their fans. They pioneered experimental new forms of music, steeped in exotic mysticism and esoterica imported from the Far East. And in 1967, they became the first musicians in history to perform a live broadcast to the entire planet. The LSD researcher and spiritual guru Timothy Leary declared of the new messiahs, prototypes of evolutionary agents sent by God, endowed with a mysterious power to create a new human species. To explain these unprecedented events, a growing Christian press churned up conspiracy theories about communist plots to take over America with the help of pop music. They began to see pop culture not just as degenerate, but orchestrated by the malevolent and ungodly forces of the Soviets. In tandem with these shifts in pop culture, another technology, the contraceptive pill, was leading to both sexual and social revolutions. Taking power of their own reproductive destinies, many women began to reject their future as homemakers and instead entered the workforce in larger and larger numbers, adding their voices to a growing and accelerating counterculture. And for the first time, globalized mass media opened the window on the nightmares of mechanized war. From Vietnam to the Cuban Missile Crisis, to the growing tensions in the Middle East, escalating and multiplying conflicts seemed to be edging the world closer to a nuclear confrontation. As endless depictions of hatred, cruelty and violence flooded into people's homes through the television, a new generation turned away from the values they saw as behind it. As images of atrocity spilled into popular culture, it fueled social upheaval bordering on insurrection. The camera gazed inwards, to government brutality and endemic injustice. Disillusioned with the status quo, younger generations began experimenting with new religious movements, strange blends of Eastern mysticism, paganism, science fiction, socialism, and psychiatry.
And yet the prophets predicted this would happen. They also warned that in the end times there would arise false prophets and false religions.
Turn on, tune in, drop out. I mean drop out of high school, drop out of college.
I am the writer of the textbooks of Scientology.
It was in San Francisco, a city on the edge of the Western world, that became the centre of this cultural maelstrom, attracting idealists, mystics, con artists, radicals and freaks from across the world. Through the course of the 1960s and 1970s, the Golden City was to host several groups that would, in their own way, play important roles in this strange new mythology of the 20th century, and hasten Christian conservatives' deepening paranoia that the age of the Antichrist was indeed at hand. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was a Scientology splinter group founded in London by an architecture student called Robert Moore and a former call girl from Glasgow called Mary Ann McLean. After developing code reading techniques based off the Scientology e-meter, they built a small following and took to the streets to preach about the coming nuclear apocalypse. Declared suppressive persons by L. Ron Hubbard in the mid-60s, the group moved to Mexico, where they claimed they were contacted by non-human entities and fused into a single consciousness called the Amiga. It was here Moore, now calling himself Robert de Grimston, wrote the foundations of the processional theology. It recognized three great gods, Jehovah, Lucifer and Satan, with Christ as their earthly emissary. They developed a strange new vision of the apocalypse, in which Christ would reconcile with Satan at the end of time, in the ultimate act of forgiveness. Together, Christ would judge humanity, while Satan executed his orders. During the Summer of Love in 1967, the Process Church rented property in San Francisco, where they attempted to spread their new religion. Their doom-laden theology, black robes, rank-and-file celibacy, and straight-edge lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the colourful, idealistic, drug-infused character of the hippie movement. But despite this, the Process Church found some success. This was aided in part by a well-designed magazine in which they interviewed celebrities such as Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, and the DJ Jimmy Savile. While the Process Church preached about the apocalypse during the Summer of Love, another former Scientologist, the jailbird and drifter Charles Manson, was released from prison and moved into a house just 2 blocks away. Possessed by a magnetic charisma and some degree of musical talent, Manson began to accumulate a small following, mostly of young women. Manson and his group emerged from the same cultural ferment as the Process Church, a social tapestry of gurus, radicals, communes and cults. As such, Manson's own worldview shared a number of similarities to those around him, including elements of Scientology, the Book of Revelation, and fragments of beliefs of the process, which you may have picked up from reading their magazine. But the belief of Manson and his followers were also attuned to the headlines and pop culture, particularly the racial tensions which were flaring into violence across the country. Manson also believed the Beatles were sending him secret coded messages about the Book of Revelation, which they encoded in their new record, the White Album. Inspired, Manson planned to create an album of his own, also containing hidden messages. Only he thought that when his album was released, it would subliminally trigger an apocalyptic race war, a catastrophe that he and his followers would be spared after they escaped to an underground city beneath Death Valley, a place he called the Bottomless Pit. Manson's recording career was never to take off, after being snubbed by numerous record producers, including LA-based Terry Melcher. With his music career failing, in 1969 he decided to change tactics and send Melcher a message, and so sent his followers to kill whoever lived in his old house in LA, in as gruesome a way as they could.
A wandering band of members of a so-called religious cult, with a leader they called Jesus, has had 3 of its followers arrested in the investigation of the murder of Sharon Tate and 6 others.
Police said they were a pseudo-religious cult. People who worked on the ranch said they were heavy users of drugs. The family's leader, Charles Manson, is jailed here. It is expected that he will be charged in the Tate murders.
In a scene described by one investigator as reminiscent of a weird religious rite, 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski. Miss Tate, who starred in Valley of the Dolls, was 8 months pregnant.
These killings confirmed the worst fears of Christian conservatives, that beneath the messages of peace and love promoted by new religious movements and the hippies lay something unspeakably evil and demonic. So soon, new layers of interpretation were added to the growing mythology. That Tate was essentially in the wrong place at the wrong time proved too chaotic and unsatisfactory an explanation, and so the public began to concoct their own. It was rumoured that while in LA years before, while Melcher was still living there, the Beatles had taken acid in the house that in the future would have references to their lyrics scrawled on the wall in Tate's blood. It was whispered that the CIA had brainwashed Manson as part of their MKUltra mind control experiment to discredit the hippie movement. Other versions centred on her husband, Roman Polanski, who had recently adapted the best-selling book Rosemary's Baby into a movie. Its plot revolved around Rosemary's elderly next-door neighbours secretly running a devil-worshipping cult and who were grooming her to be impregnated by Satan and to give birth to the Antichrist.
That whole bunch, the parties with the singing and the flute and the chanting, those are Espas or Sabbats or whatever they're called.
Don't get excited, huh?
Read what they do, Guy. They use blood in their rituals, and the blood that has the most power is baby's blood.
Satan is his father, not Guy. He came up from hell and begat a son of mortal woman. God is dead! Hail Satan! Satan lives! The year is won!
Stylish and slickly directed, the movie garnered rave reviews and enjoyed the type of cultural impact The Matrix would on later generations. The demonic nature of the movie, combined with the connection to the Manson murders, added a dark mystique, making it an instant cult classic. Courting controversy, the Process Church featured an article by Manson in their official magazine on the philosophy of death. This act, along with their black robes and worship of Lucifer, ensured their infamy. So powerful was their image that even after they disintegrated in the mid-70s, stories kept circulating that they had instead simply went underground, that they had changed their name, accumulated vast wealth, and were influencing society from behind the scenes. Only one part of this was true. The final vestiges of them did change their name and did transform into something else, into a charity based in Utah called the Best Friends Animal Society. Despite this anticlimactic fate, they still haunt the imagination of religious conservatives, though not as much as another group founded in San Francisco in the 60s, this time by a charismatic socialite called Howard Stanton LaVey, otherwise known as Anton. Part satire, part publicity stunt, LaVey's Church of Satan was in vogue for a short time in the late 60s and early 70s, gaining a few celebrity followers along the way.
We feel that all religions are coming around to Satanism. We're in the very throes of a new satanic age.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
Its main text, the Satanic Bible, was a provocative muddle of objectivism and social Darwinism, heavily borrowed from other sources, and rushed together to cash in on the success of Rosemary's Baby.
They accuse me of just being a money-making racketeer, a con man of some sort.
The publicity man and Mr. LeVay came upon the idea, they hit upon the idea of the Satanist church.
Like other new religious movements during the period, the Church of Satan gained maybe a few hundred followers during LeVay's lifetime, but it would loom large in the evangelical imagination, its pantomime rituals, pranks, and hunger for publicity providing the ultimate canvas on which they could map their fears. Together with the Process Church and the Manson family, they helped forge in popular culture a mental image of what cults looked like. LeVay wasn't the only one to cash in on the success of Rosemary's Baby. Throughout the 70s, the satanic cult became a pop culture trope that cropped up in trashy paperbacks and schlock horror. One series, The Satan Sleuth, depicts slaughter worse than the Tate Manson orgy of violence, and who depicts hippies, draft dodgers, lefties and dropouts as the culprits. Joy Fielding's The Transformation also depicts a Manson-like cult who conduct murderous home invasions, while many others routinely depicted robed satanic priests, titillation, torture, cannibalism, human sacrifice, and, of course, bearing the devil's child.
Look, I don't believe all this business about the devil. My mother might have gotten mixed up with you and your secret society, but...
She was singled out by Satan to bear his child.
One of these movies, The Devil's Reign, starring William Shatner, even had Anton LaVey act as a set consultant, design rituals, and even appear in a cameo.
Has it been prepared?
It has.
These often formulaic books and films followed the same beats. Next-door neighbours that were secretly performing weird satanic rituals, which often involved killing and torture, often of women, and often of a sexual nature.
Your devotion to the pagan Catholic faith is heresy to our Lord Satan.
They commonly invoked fears of children being abducted, abused, and sacrificed.
Weird happenings, Marcus. Children sacrificed to the devil.
The continued success of these themes reflected growing social anxieties, both the sexual revolution and the cultural drift between the generations.
Tell me where my daughter is.
But I am your daughter.
As public fascination with the occult reached its zenith, these fictions began to bleed into everyday reality. Slowly, people came forward claiming they'd been members of satanic covens, just like those depicted in the media, but had decided to convert to Christianity and spread the truth of their existence. The first was a former army typist and clerk called John Wayne Todd, who was discharged for, amongst other things, compulsive lying, emotional instability, drug abuse, and the inability to tell fantasy from reality. Despite being stationed in West Germany, after returning to America, he claimed to have been a Green Beret in Vietnam, who fled after killing his commanding officer. When asked to explain why he hadn't been sent to prison, he said he was a satanic high priest who was part of a well-connected Illuminati family who had covered up all of his crimes.
I came out of a family that, from the time that I was 5 years old, I knew nothing but witchcraft. So when I was 14, I was initiated into organized witchcraft. In other words, I was made, I was ordained, and I was placed through an initiation into the sixth realm. And this initiation consisted of a blood sacrifice. The Illuminati is the occult organization that we belong to. It means the light bearers. The witch is called Mariah, the conquering wind. And all of a sudden we were discussing a world ruler that would be personally guided by Lucifer that could gain control of the world supernaturally and take control of people's minds.
The Illuminati were founded in 1776 by university professor Adam Weishaupt, who believed the monarchy and the church were repressing freedom of thought. In a time when such ideas were taboo, he dreamed of creating a new type of state based on the principles of liberty, rationalism, and moral equality. After finding other secret societies such as the Freemasons too mystically inclined, not to mention too expensive, he decided to found his own. After toying with a few ideas for names, such as the B Order and the Covenant of Perfectibility, which he abandoned after people found it too weird, he settled upon the Order of the Illuminati. His attempts to spread it were beset with frustrations, not least because he focused on recruiting atheist university students who were both obnoxious and incompetent. And for many years it lacked any higher level mysteries, and thus no way of progressing up the ladder. As a challenger brand in a crowded marketplace of other secret societies, the Illuminati attempted to negotiate alliances in order to grow and spread their ideas, but these often fell through. Years of infighting, clumsy plotting, unclear goals, and squabbling over who got to make up the ancient rituals eventually took its toll. After the Duke of Bavaria outlawed them in 1785, their homes were raided and their internal documents seized, revealing the full extent of their secrets and schemes. These included plans for an all-female Illuminati branch, as well as details of how to perform abortions. The death penalty was imposed for membership, and Weishaupt fled to Saxony, where he continued to teach philosophy until his death in 1830. The schemes of the Illuminati were audacious, but no more so than other Enlightenment ideas of the time, which shared a similar anti-clerical and anti-monarchical character. So after the explosion of violence and regicide that characterised the French Revolution a few years later, some authors pointed a finger at the now non-existent Illuminati. Despite imploding due to their own incompetence, the Illuminati became the go-to explanation of how to perceive order in times of extreme chaos. After the 1830s, stories about them eventually died out, only to be revived during the First World War by the author Nesta Webster to explain the unimaginable horror that had consumed Europe, including the regicidal Bolshevik Revolution. So in invoking the Illuminati, Todd was drawing on a deep well of folklore, recently repopularised in the epic psychedelic satire, the Illuminatus trilogy, by Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Scheer. But in claiming he had been one of them, Todd couldn't help but add a few details of his own. At one point he claimed to have been the personal wizard of John F. Kennedy, who he said had faked his death and was plotting in the shadows to bring about a world government. He also claimed his sister was an Illuminati priestess who could summon demons in the form of UFOs. In the early 70s he began touring evangelical churches and began to spread these stories to a wider audience. Sometimes he would inject drama by claiming to have heard gunshots from outside the church, going on to say he had been inundated with death threats for exposing the truth. For a time, Todd gained brief fame in California thanks to being a regular guest on a Christian TV show called Amazing Prophecies. However, he was later ostracised from the Christian community for trying to pick up teenage girls during Bible study class. After parting ways with the Christian community, Todd opened up an occult bookshop and ran workshops that drew similar complaints of sexual harassment. Strangely, it was during this time that Christian fundamentalist publisher Schick Publications decided to use his materials for their long-running comic series, The Crusaders. The Crusaders introduced a character clearly based on Todd, a former Illuminati high priest called Lance Collins, who had once commanded an army of 65,000 witches but had now converted to Christianity to lecture kids on the dangers of satanic cults. But in Todd's cosmology, the Illuminati are actually from Scotland, and had went underground after the Romans invaded and tried to suppress them for conducting human sacrifice. And that today, the Beatles represented the revival of the ancient pagan musical traditions, whose hypnotic beats and lyrics were literally casting spells on teenagers. In 1973, it's rumoured that Todd confronted Christian stand-up comedian Mike Warnke and accused him of stealing his material. Warnke had been making a name for himself in the Christian tour scene off the back of similar claims of being a former satanic high priest who had converted to Christianity. But soon, his fame would massively eclipse the increasingly marginalised Todd. Released during a boom in the evangelical press, Warnke's book, The Satan Seller, was his tell-all testimony of his meteoric rise through the satanic ranks, where he was on the verge of graduation into the Illuminati, before being betrayed by his evil brethren and converting to Christianity while in Vietnam. In his books and comedy routines, he claimed to have summoned demons, met Anton LaVey, chopped off people's fingers, attended satanic rituals alongside Charles Manson, and orchestrated a sadistic gang rape for the entertainment of his coven. Despite admitting to these very serious crimes, the book was a bestseller and made Warnke a star. Between the 70s and early 90s, he toured revival churches across America, becoming one of the most popular Christian stand-up acts in history.
I was, into Satanism and drugs and all that stuff in the 60s, and pretty much into the hippie culture and stuff, and going to college. Everybody went to college to avoid the draft.
Are all of these true stories?
All of them have happened to me. As a matter of fact, I have never preached about anything I haven't experienced. After she was dead, they cut her chest open, took out her heart, cut it up in little pieces, and took communion on her. And after she was dead, they cut down both sides of her head, and down the back they peeled the flesh away from the bone. They stole her skull to be used in satanic rituals, took her mutilated body, put her in a garbage sack, and threw her in the dump. You can absorb that force, they say, and it makes you a stronger wizard, warlock, or whatever.
Amazingly, Warnke's claims were not fully investigated until the early 90s, after which he was exposed as a fraud and his ministry folded, despite his apologising for his exaggerations.
I was basically drawn into it when I was young, just wanting to be somebody special. I just wanted to be different than everybody and have something that was special that everybody, looked up to.
Mike Warnke and John Wayne Todd were the first of a growing roster of chancers and charlatans that would emerge over the coming decades. Claiming to be former Satanists, they drew on pop culture tropes and horror movie cliches about robes, candles, and human sacrifice, and made a living through books and speaking fees. But beginning in the late 70s, new types of claims would emerge, made not by alleged perpetrators of Satanism, but by its victims. And far more disturbingly, they would emerge from an unlikely alliance between evangelical Christians and psychotherapists. And similarly, the growth and spread of these stories would be facilitated through a feedback loop of pop culture cliches disseminated through the mass media.
The Allen Revival Hour presents Miracles Today with God's man of faith and power, Evangelist A.A. Allen. Now, by special film transcription, we take you onto the world's greatest gospel tent.
Now, watch out. Don't tell me that demons are not real today. Someone the other day was saying, Alan, I just saw that new movie titled The Three Faces of Eve.
In the middle of the 1950s, Chris Costner Sizemore became one of the few people in the world to be diagnosed with the rare psychiatric condition, multiple personality disorder, or MPD. Because of its rarity, the case drew fascination from psychiatrists who viewed her as a curiosity. But it also drew the attention of publishers and movie studios looking to cash in on a recent movie about a woman with MPD called Lizzie.
Yes, you killed her and I'm glad. And now I'm gonna kill you. No, no! You Dr. Wright's a fool. What can he do? Nothing. I'm taking over now, see? No, I won't let you. I'm gonna kill you. You can't. Oh, yes, I can. And I will. No, you won't. I will.
A book about Sizemore's case was rushed into publication, followed by a movie, The Three Faces of Eve. The story involved Eve's personality splitting in two following a traumatic childhood event, into the timid and faithful wife, Eve White, and the wild and seductive Eve Black, as if articulating looming traditionalist fears about growing female sexual autonomy.
Well, in a literal and terrifying sense, inside this demure young woman, two very vivid and different personalities were battling for the mastery of her character.
What does this voice tell you to do?
To do things like leave Ralph, take Bonnie and run away. All kind of terrible things like that. Hey.
Feeling better now? So you're not Eve White?
I certainly am not. Hey, Hey, maybe one night this week, you can tell your wife you got to see a patient.
And do what?
Go dancing. I bet you're a real cute dancer. Hey, this radio working?
Can you come out, as you call it, whenever you want to?
No. I wish I could, but I can't. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I tell you one thing, though, it's getting easier. Because she's getting weaker, and I'm getting stronger. And one of these days, just like I tell you, I'm going to come out and stay out. Just you wait and see.
Your eyelids are getting heavy.
The film was met with critical acclaim, and Joanne Woodward won an Oscar for Best Actress.
The winner is Joanne Woodward.
It was also a hit with the public and led to an increased awareness of MPD. As public awareness grew, psychiatrists soon came to covet multiple personality disorder cases. In the late 50s, a young woman from the Midwest called Shirley Mason sought psychiatric help after experiencing blackouts. Her inquiries led her to the psychiatrist Cornelia B. Wilbur. Not long after therapy began, Mason began to grow close to her therapist and picked up on her interest in multiple personality disorder. Mason was extremely suggestible and fantasy-prone, and soon after learning of her therapist's interest in the condition, began to exhibit the symptoms in abundance, uncovering no less than 16 distinct personalities. Wanting to cash in on the case she had so long sought, Wilbur enlisted the help of author Flora Schreiber, who wrote up the case in a book called Sybil. On learning this, Mason sent a letter to her psychiatrist stating that she'd been lying about having multiple personalities, but Wilbur dismissed this claim as a denial of her condition. The book sold over 6 million copies, and on the back of this success, a TV miniseries of the same name was rushed into production, starring Oscar winner Diane Woodward in the role of the therapist.
Is it fun talking like a little girl, Miss Dorset?
What?
What just happened? Jet lag?
And again, the cause of Sybil's multiple personalities was extreme childhood trauma. By the late 70s, the idea that childhood trauma could cause personality to fragment and that this trauma could account for missing childhood memories had become another pop culture trope. Accordingly, diagnosis of MPD spread through the psychiatric community like a contagion. But to evangelicals, this seeming epidemic represented something else entirely.
For the first time in medical history, psychiatrists and medical doctors at last, they believe there is a direct connection with demons or something out of the pit.
Given the cultural climate of the late 70s, it was only a matter of time before these two domains fused. The psychiatric belief that childhood trauma could cause multiple personalities that concealed hidden memories, and belief in the existence of a global network of satanic cults promoted by Christian conservatives. This happened in 1980 in the best-selling book Michelle Remembers, which told the story of the case of Michelle Smith as told by her therapist and future husband, the Catholic psychiatrist Lawrence Pasdar. After initially seeking psychiatric help to deal with a miscarriage, Michelle emerged after 200 hours of therapy to believe she had been the childhood victim of a sadistic cult run by her own mother, who was a member of the Church of Satan. The lurid stories included Michelle being kidnapped and kept in a cage above a pit of snakes, having a dismembered fetus rubbed on her, eating worm soup, having horns surgically attached to her head, witnessing the crucifixion of a kitten, being made to witness a fatal car accident, and being victim of repeated sexual abuse over the course of an 81-day satanic ritual. The book climaxed in the cult summoning Satan himself, who was fought back with the help of the Virgin Mary. The barrier for evidence was low. Rashes Michelle suffered during the course of the therapy were explained as body memories of being burned by the forked tail of the devil. An investigation conducted years later found no record of the fatal car accident she described, no evidence that all her teeth had been removed, or that she had ever had horns, no accounts of any strange activity in the cemetery that she claimed the abuse took place in over a 2.5-month period. In fact, photos and school records emerged of Michelle at the time she believed she was being kept prisoner by the cult. After the book was released, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan threatened to sue them for libel, which is one of the reasons we never got to see a Michelle Remembers movie adaptation. But unlike Mike Warnk and John Wayne Todd, Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pasdar seem to have genuinely believed these events had taken place. How then could Michelle become so convinced of events that had never even happened? In 1986, in the moments following the Challenger shuttle disaster, the cognitive psychologists Ulrich Neisser and Nicole Harsh decided to conduct an experiment.
It's chilly in Florida. Icicles formed on the pad overnight.
They wanted to test a theory known as flashbulb memory, which supposed that emotionally powerful events are stored more accurately in the mind.
Challenger going into it. This shuttle mission will launch. My God.
1 minute 15.
There's been an explosion.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9.
Oh, the vehicle exploded! Oh, dear God.
They asked students to write down how they first learned of the disaster, where they were, who they were with, and what they were doing. Three years later, they asked the same 106 students to recall the same events. What they found was only 3 of them recalled the events as they did originally. Many of the others found that their memories had changed, become confused with the accounts of other people and things they had seen on the television. For a quarter of them, not a single part of their memories were true. When confronted with the evidence, some of the subjects became unsettled, almost hostile.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
They discovered that contrary to the theory of flashbulb memory, that heightened emotions do not mean we record information in greater clarity. Instead, we mistake intensity of feeling for factual accuracy. And that each time we recall a memory, it is overwritten with a new, slightly altered version to suit the psychological and emotional needs of the moment. Over time, these errors accumulate and drift further and further from an accurate depiction of what really happened. Things that occurred at different places, at different times, become muddled with fragments of dreams, our imagination, and things we've seen in the media. Professor Elizabeth Loftus is one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, and spent over 4 decades studying memory formation. Her research demonstrated that memories are not stored in the mind in crystalline form, but are instead reconstructed each time they are recalled, to suit the emotional and mental needs of the moment. She also showed that this reconstructive model of memory was highly imperfect, open to change in the face of misinformation or suggestive questioning. In one experiment, she interviewed 24 adults about events that happened to them in their childhood based on interviews with their relatives. Unknown to the participants, one of these 4 events, being lost in a shopping mall, was entirely fictitious, but with little encouragement, 5 of these participants came to believe these events had really happened to them, adding details that came entirely from their own imagination. In another experiment, she showed over 150 participants the videotape of a car accident. 10 days later, they were asked to fill in one of 2 questionnaires, which differed in the language used and the ways the questions were asked. The first group were asked neutrally worded questions, like how fast the cars were travelling when they hit one another. The second group had more dramatic language, asking how fast they were travelling when they smashed into one another. Those in the second group were more likely to recall details such as broken glass, which did not exist in the videotape. These frailties are particularly true of our earliest memories. Until the age of 2 or 3, we have virtually no recollection of anything. Long-term memory formation does not fully develop until the age of 5, meaning few of us have any memories until the age of about 6 or 7, what's known to neurologists as childhood amnesia. This understanding of memory as ghostly, malleable, and ever-changing is precisely the opposite to the understanding of memory used by psychiatrists such as Lawrence Pasdar. Recovered memory therapy, as it was known, was based on the idea that mental illness could be caused by traumatic events in childhood that hid themselves from the conscious mind. They believed everything we experience, from infancy onwards, is stored somewhere in our minds in perfect form, waiting to be uncovered with the right set of questions. To find them, they put patients not just under hypnosis, but on powerful trance-inducing drugs, such as barbiturates. While the patient sank into hypersuggestive states, the psychiatrist would interrogate them about their fleeting and fragmentary childhood memories, and ask them to expand details until they found what they considered the cause of the problem. Because of the vulnerable state of the patient, the worldview of the psychiatrist would play a powerful role in the nature of these supposedly recovered memories, especially if they had strongly held beliefs about what they might find. Not only were Lawrence Pasdar's views influenced by his being a devout Catholic, but also by his experience of being a doctor in West Africa in the 1960s. He became fascinated with rumours of secret societies of witch doctors who were abducting children to use in human sacrifice. One of the rumours of children being kept in cages before they were sacrificed ended up in their book as one of Michelle's memories of her time in satanic captivity. After 18 months of intensive therapy, Michelle's original memories had been replaced by a new reality of devil-worshipping cults lurking beneath the surface of society.
Didn't say she's highly nervous. Didn't say she's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She said she is grievously vexed with the devil.
When they thought they were recovering memories, they were in fact creating them, transforming half-remembered fragments of her childhood into a patchwork of fantasy, folklore, and imagery taken from the mass media. After the publication of their book in 1980, this new mythology would take on a life of its own. Its salacious mix of sadism, horror, and sexual depravity became the perfect fit for the ratings-obsessed attention economy of the cable news networks. And once seemingly authenticated by TV's cultural gatekeepers, these once fringe ideas would explode into the mainstream and set in motion a mass hysteria that would leave no corner of popular culture untouched.